The foghorn went off at 2:51 in the morning, and the bay outside the window was glass. No fog, no mist, nothing moving on the water that I could see, and I was making sure not to look directly at it. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'm asking because I want to know how many of you are alone right now, the way I was alone, in a place where the next person was 40 minutes away by boat. 2 months ago, I was a 41-year-old assistant manager at a printing supply company in Spokane. My wife had left in February. My lease was up in April. The company restructured in May, and I was one of the people who didn't make the new org chart. I'd been a Coast Guard reservist in my 20s, 3 years, mostly admin work, and that's the only reason the application went anywhere. And yet the Oregon State Heritage Lighthouse Service was looking for a relief keeper at Cape Adair. The listing said, experience with isolated postings preferred, $58,000 a year, room and board, 14 days on the rock, 7 days off. I called the number on a Tuesday, and the woman on the other end sounded surprised that I was calling at all. She said the position had been open since November. It was August. The drive from the mainland office took 2 hours, and then there was a 40-minute boat ride out to the headland. The boat captain, a man named Ed Saperstein, didn't talk much on the way out. When we got to the dock, he told me there were 3 things I should know before he left, and then he only told me 2. The first was that the cell signal cut out about 100 yards from the cliff, so don't bother checking. The second was that the radio in the cottage worked on a different frequency than the radio in the lantern room, and I should never confuse them. He started to say the third thing, and then he looked at the water and said, "He'll have written it down for you. It's all in there." Then he got back in the boat and left. I asked who he meant. He didn't answer. The cottage sat about 30 yards from the lighthouse itself, connected by a covered walkway because the wind off the cape will knock you down if you're not braced for it. Inside, everything was clean. The bed was made, the dishes were washed and stacked. There was a coffee mug upside down on a folded towel by the sink. The kind of thing a person does when they're going to be gone a while, and they don't want a ring on the porcelain. Yeah, on the kitchen table there was a green 3-ring binder. On the front cover, written in black marker in careful block letters, it said, "Read before dark." I sat down. I opened it. The first page was a list. 13 items, numbered, each one written in the same careful hand, each one underlined twice. Above the list, in a single line, was a sentence that said, "These are not suggestions." The man who wrote that hadn't put his name on the binder anywhere I could find. There was no introduction, no explanation. Behind the list, separated by tabs, there were 13 sections. Each section had a heading that matched a rule and a few paragraphs of notes underneath. Some of the notes were dated, going back almost 11 years. I read the list once. Then I read it again, slower, because the first time I'd been smiling, and the second time I wasn't. I'm going to give you the rules in the order I learned what they meant, not the order they were written, because some of them I didn't understand until I broke them. The first one I broke was Rule 11, and I broke it on my second night. Rule 11 said, "The tide chart printed and framed on the wall above the kitchen radio is incorrect. Disregard it. Use only the laminated chart in the second drawer of the keeper's desk in the lantern room." I read that on Monday afternoon. By Tuesday evening, I'd forgotten it. The framed one was right there at eye level. The laminated one was up 2 flights of iron stairs in a drawer I hadn't opened yet. I was making coffee. I glanced up. I noted that low tide was at 9:14 p.m. I planned to walk out on the tidal flats around 9:30 to look at the rock pools, and that the previous keeper had left a stack of marine biology books on the shelf, and I'd been flipping through one about anemones earlier in the day. At 9:18 p.m., I was halfway down the path to the flats, and I heard the water coming back in. Not going out, coming in fast, the way it does on a flood tide. I turned around and walked up the path and got back to the cottage and pulled out the laminated chart from the drawer in the lantern room. The laminated chart said low tide that night was at 4:46 a.m. The frame chart on the wall was off by exactly 7 hours and 12 minutes. Every entry, every day of the month. I checked the frame chart against tide data on a printed almanac I'd brought with me. The frame chart was wrong. It had always been wrong. Yet someone had printed it carefully and put it under glass and hung it on the wall in the most visible place in the kitchen, and someone else, the man who kept the light before me, had written Rule 11 and put a laminated correct version in a drawer. That was the first time I went back to the binder and read the notes behind a rule. The notes for Rule 11 said, in his handwriting, "I do not know who replaces it. I have taken it down 4 times. It is back within 9 days, sometimes sooner, and always in a slightly different position. I have stopped removing it. Use the laminated chart. If you go onto the flats based on the frame chart, you will be in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I cannot help you from up here." That's a real sentence. He underlined, "I cannot help you from up here." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. I called the mainland office on the satellite phone. I asked the woman who'd hired me, whose name was Carol, whether the previous keeper was reachable. There was a pause. She said he had retired and was no longer with the service. I asked where he had retired to. She said she didn't have that information. I asked his name. She said she wasn't comfortable giving that out over the phone, and was there anything else? I asked her how long he'd worked there. She said 11 years and 4 months. I said, "When did he leave?" She said, "The position has been open since November." She didn't say it like a date. She said it the way you'd say, "since the beginning," which was the same way she'd said it on the first call, before I'd seen the binder. So before I'd seen the cup upside down by the sink, before I'd seen the bed made with such precision that it felt like a hospital corner. I got off the phone. I walked through the cottage. I opened drawers I hadn't opened yet. In the bedroom closet, there were 6 identical pairs of work pants folded on a shelf, and a winter coat on a hanger, and on the floor, a pair of leather boots with the laces tucked inside. The boots were wet, not damp. Wet with sand in the treads, fresh sand, the kind that hadn't dried yet. I touched the leather and pulled my hand back. I stood in the closet for a long time without moving. Then I went to the binder and read Rule 12. Rule 12 said, "Do not say his name out loud inside the cottage or the lantern room." Notes, letters, logs, writing is fine. Speaking is not. If you must refer to him as the previous keeper, this is not negotiable. I had not said his name. I didn't know his name. Carol hadn't given it to me. I had never spoken it, but I had asked for it. I sat down on the bedroom floor. I put my back against the wall. I made myself think very carefully about what I had said into the satellite phone. I had said, what was his name? I had said it inside the cottage. The wet boots were in the closet next to me. I want to be clear about what I am claiming and what I am not. I am not claiming that asking for a name in a phone call is the same thing as speaking the name. I am claiming that the boots had been dry that morning. I had moved them when I unpacked because they were in the way. They had been dry. I had set them on the closet floor in a particular position, parallel 2 inches apart. Yet the sand on the treads had not been there. The boots were now turned slightly inward, toes pointing toward each other, the way a person stands when they are talking to someone face to face. I went back to the binder. I read every single rule, top to bottom, and then I read every set of notes behind every rule. It took me until almost midnight. I made coffee twice and forgot to drink the second cup. The wind picked up and the cottage made the sounds cottages make, contracting in the cold, and I noted every sound and went back to reading. I'm not going to give you all 13 rules at once. I'm going to give them to you the way they happened to me, because the binder told you what to do, but it did not tell you what would happen if you got it wrong. And the things that happened are the part that matters. Yes, there are 4 more I want to tell you about now, because they're the ones that started the part of this where I stopped sleeping. Rule 2 said, the radio in the cottage will receive transmissions between 2:47 a.m. and 3:13 a.m. Do not respond to any of them. Do not write down what they say. Do not let anyone else in the cottage hear them, in the event that you have a guest. The radio in the lantern room operates on a different frequency and is unaffected. Use that one if you need to make any call during this window. Rule 3 said, if the foghorn sounds when there is no fog, do not look at the water from the lantern room. Do not look at the water from the cottage windows. Close the curtains on the seaward side. Stay inside. Do not investigate. The horn will stop on its own within 40 minutes. If it does not stop, see Rule 8. Rule 6 said, never count the lighthouse stairs while descending. You may count them on the way up. You may not count them on the way down. If you find yourself counting, stop. Begin a different mental task. Recite a phone number. Do not look down at your feet. Rule 9 said, the supply boat from Mr. Saperstein arrives every 9 days, on the same tide, weather permitting. Do not accept supplies from any boat that arrives sooner than 9 days. Do not accept supplies from any boat that arrives at night. Do not accept supplies from any boat that does not have Mr. Saperstein at the wheel. If anyone other than Mr. Saperstein arrives at the dock claiming to be from the service, do not go down to the dock. Stay in the lantern room. The lantern room door locks from the inside. I was on day 6. I spent that night in the kitchen with the binder open in front of me, reading the notes behind those 4 rules over and over until I had them memorized. The notes for Rule 3 were the longest. I'm going to paraphrase what he wrote, because I'm not sure I can repeat his sentences in the order he wrote them, and one of the things I learned later is that order matters. He wrote that the foghorn had gone off without fog 41 times during his 11 years. He had logged each occurrence. He had a chart in the back of the binder with dates and times and durations. Most of them were between 2 and 3 in the morning. Most of them lasted between 12 and 30 minutes. He wrote that on 3 occasions he had looked out the window. He did not say what he had seen. He wrote, instead, that after each of those 3 occasions, and he had lost a week, he used that phrase, lost a week. The notes had a small letter A next to it, and the footnote at the bottom of the page said, I do not mean I do not remember the week. I mean the calendar in the kitchen had advanced 7 days. The supply boat had come and gone in that time. There were dishes in the sink I do not remember using. The logbook in the lantern room had entries in my handwriting that I do not remember writing. The 3rd time this happened, the entries described things I did not do. I do not know who wrote them. I am not going to look at the water again. Underneath that, in different ink, he had written, it is asking me to look. It learns what works. Be careful what you teach it. I closed the binder. That night, at 2:54 a.m., the radio in the cottage came on by itself. I had not turned it on. The dial light glowed orange in the dark kitchen, and the speaker hissed for about 10 seconds, and then a voice came through that sounded like Ed Saperstein, like the man who had brought me out on the boat, and the voice said my name, not the name on my employment paperwork. The name my mother used when I was small, which only 3 people in the world ever knew, and 2 of them are dead, and the 3rd one left in February. The voice said the name twice. It said it like a question. The second time it added, "It's me. The line's bad. Pick up." I did not pick up. I sat on the kitchen floor with my hand over my mouth, and I watched the dial glow, and I counted my own breaths. The voice tried 3 more times in the next 19 minutes. The last time, it didn't say my name. It just said very quietly, "I can hear you breathing." Yet at 3:13 a.m., the radio went silent. The dial light stayed on for another minute, and then it clicked off. I sat there until the sun came up. In the morning, the calendar on the kitchen wall said it was Tuesday. I had gone to bed on Sunday night, and what had happened with the radio had happened on what should have been Monday morning, and the calendar should have said Monday, and it said Tuesday. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at that calendar and told myself I had miscounted, that I had lost a day to fatigue, that the calendar had been on Monday and I'd somehow flipped it, that there was a reasonable explanation. I went to the logbook in the lantern room. The last entry was in my handwriting. It was dated Monday night. It said, "He came up the stairs at 11:40 and asked if I wanted coffee. I said no. He went back down. Yeah, the stairs are wrong. I counted them on the way up, and there were 42. Coming down, he said there were 38. He said this is how it starts. Do not count. I do not remember writing that entry. I have never counted the stairs. I have not, to my knowledge, met anyone in this lighthouse other than Ed Saperstein, who left 2 months ago and has not come back yet. I went down to the kitchen. I checked the supply pantry. There were items missing: a loaf of bread, 2 cans of soup, a jar of instant coffee that had been almost full. Whoever had been in the cottage on Monday had eaten. I went to the dock. Ed's boat had not come. The next supply day was 4 days out, by my count, but I no longer trusted my count. I went back to the cottage and did the thing I had been avoiding. I opened the door to the previous keeper's bedroom. The one Rule 5 said to leave alone, and I stood in the doorway and looked. The bed was made. The boots were in the closet. The wet sand on the boots was gone. The leather was dry. But on the nightstand, which had been empty when I'd looked in on day 1, there was now a small white envelope. My name was written on the front of it. The childhood name. The one the radio had used. I have not opened the envelope yet. It's sitting on the kitchen table next to the binder. I'm telling you this because it is currently 4:14 in the morning on day 7, and I just heard footsteps on the iron stairs of the lighthouse, and I am in the cottage, and the covered walkway door is locked from this side, and the footsteps are coming down. I'm going to put this recorder in my pocket. I'm going to go look at what is on the stairs. Rule 6 says I can count them on the way up. I want to know if there are 42 or 38. I'll tell you what I find. There were 41 stairs on the way up. Not 42, not 38. 41. I counted them twice, going slow, my hand on the iron railing, the recorder in my breast pocket picking up the sound of my boots on each step. The lantern room door at the top was closed. I had left it open. I always left it open. I'd made a habit of it on day 2 because the door was heavy and it had a tendency to swing shut behind you, and the latch on the inside was stiff, and I did not want to be locked in the lantern room at night with no one on the rock to let me out. The door was closed. I stood on the landing and listened. The footsteps I had heard from the cottage had stopped. I did not know if they had stopped because whoever was making them had reached the bottom and gone out into the walkway, or because they had reached the top and were standing on the other side of the door I was looking at. I want to tell you what I did next, but first I need to tell you about Rule 4, because Rule 4 was the reason I had brought a hammer up the stairs with me. Rule 4 said, the lantern room door must never be opened from the outside between sunset and sunrise unless you are certain you closed it from the inside. If you are unsure, do not open it. Sleep on the landing if you must. Wait for daylight. The door has a small brass plate at eye level. Press your palm flat against the plate before turning the handle. If the plate is warm, the door is safe. If the plate is cold, do not open the door. The plate should always be warm in the morning. If it is not, see Rule 10. Rule 10 was about what to do if multiple rules failed at once. As I had not read Rule 10 yet, I had read the first 9 sets of notes, and I had stopped because I was tired and because the notes were making me afraid to read more, and I had told myself I would read the rest in the morning. The morning had not come yet. I was standing on the landing of a lighthouse on the Oregon coast at 4 a.m. of day 7, and the brass plate on the door in front of me was the temperature of a thing that had been left in a freezer. I put my palm against it and held it there. I counted to 10. The cold did not change. It was not the cold of a metal plate on a cold night. It was the cold of a metal plate that was actively pulling the heat out of my hand, the way a piece of dry ice does, except this plate was not smoking, and it was not visibly anything. It was just brass. Brass that wanted my warmth. And I took my hand off and looked at my palm. The skin was white where the plate had touched it. It took almost a minute for the color to come back. I did not open the door. I sat down on the top step. I put the hammer across my knees. I waited. I want to be clear about what waiting on a lighthouse landing in the dark feels like, because I think there's a version of this story where I sound braver than I was. I was not brave. I was paralyzed. I sat on that step for what my watch said was 3 hours and 40 minutes, and I did not move except to shift my weight when my legs went numb. And I did not look down the stairs, and I did not look at the door, and I did not close my eyes for longer than the time it took to blink, because every time I closed them for longer than that, I heard breathing on the other side of the door that was not my own. The breathing was patient. It was the breathing of a thing that had all night. At 7:51 a.m., the brass plate warmed up. I felt it without touching it. The air on the landing changed. The breathing on the other side of the door stopped. I waited another 20 minutes until full sunrise, and then I put my palm on the plate, and it was the temperature of a thing that had been sitting in a sunlit room. I turned the handle. The door opened. The lantern room was empty. The bulb housing was clean. The logbook was on the desk where I had left it. But the laminated tide chart, the correct one, the one Rule 11 said to use, was no longer in the second drawer of the desk. It was on top of the desk, weighted down with the brass paperweight from the windowsill. And someone had drawn a line through one of the entries with a red pen. The entry for that night, the one for low tide at 11:22 p.m. Next to the line, in the margin, in a handwriting that was not mine and was not the previous keeper's, someone had written, "Come down." I went back to the cottage. I put the laminated chart in the kitchen drawer, and I put a kitchen knife on top of it, and I sat at the table, and I opened the binder to Rule 10. Rule 10 said, if 2 or more rules appear to fail in the same 24-hour period, the cottage is no longer safe. Take the binder. Take the satellite phone. Take the emergency bag from under the keeper's bed in the small bedroom. Go to the storage cellar beneath the lantern room. The trapdoor is under the rug in the lantern room. The cellar has a deadbolt on the inside. To stay in the cellar until the supply boat arrives, or until you have not heard anything for 48 hours, whichever comes first. Do not come out for any voice. Do not come out for any knock. Do not come out for any voice that sounds like mine. The notes for Rule 10 were 3 pages long. I read them twice. I'm going to summarize them, because reading them in full made my hands shake the first time, and I am not going to do that to myself again at 4 in the morning while telling you this. He wrote that he had used the cellar 4 times in 11 years. The first time was after a foghorn event in his 2nd year. The second time was after he had answered the cottage radio during the 2:47 window because the voice had said his daughter's name, and he had a daughter who was 9 years old and lived with her mother in Eugene. Yet he wrote that nothing had answered him when he spoke into the radio, but that for 3 nights afterward, the latch on the cottage door had rattled at exactly 2:47 a.m., and on the 3rd night the latch had turned, and he had been in the cellar by then. The 3rd time was after he counted the stairs going down. He did not say what happened. He wrote only, "I came back up wrong. It took 2 weeks to feel right again. I do not know what came up with me." The 4th time was the one I was reading on day 7. The notes for the 4th time were dated November 3rd of the previous year, which was 9 months before I arrived. They said, "I went down to the cellar tonight at 11:48 p.m. I am writing this from inside. The trapdoor is bolted. I have water for 6 days. I have made a mistake I cannot undo. I think the rules are not for keeping it out, and I think the rules are for keeping it from finishing what it started. If you are reading this, I am sorry. The job listing should not have gone back up. I told Carol not to repost it. She said the position has been open since November and someone has to be on the rock. I do not know if she understands what she is saying when she says that. I do not know if she is the one saying it." The notes ended there. I sat at the kitchen table with the binder open, and I tried to think clearly. The previous keeper had gone into the cellar in November. He had not come out. The job had been reposted by Carol, who, when I asked her about him, said the position had been open since November, in a tone that did not sound like a date, but like a condition. The cottage had been clean when I arrived. The bed had been made. The boots had been in the closet. So someone had been keeping the cottage clean for 9 months while no one was supposed to be living in it. I went to the lantern room. I rolled back the rug. The trap door was there. It was wood with an iron ring set into it, and the wood around the ring was scratched in a pattern I recognized from the boots in the closet. Someone had been opening that trap door regularly, recently. The scratches were fresh. I knelt down and put my ear to the wood, and I listened. I heard breathing. It was the same breathing I had heard through the lantern room door at 4 in the morning. Patient, slow. The breathing of a thing that had all the time in the world. It was in the cellar. It had been in the cellar, possibly since November. It was breathing on the other side of a wooden trap door with an iron ring, and Rule 10 said that when 2 rules failed, and the cellar was where I was supposed to go. I did not open the trap door. I rolled the rug back over it, and I went down to the cottage, and I called Ed Saperstein on the satellite phone. Carol answered. I asked for Ed. She said Ed was the contractor who handled the supply runs, and she did not have his personal number, I said his boat was supposed to come on day 9, and I needed to know when day 9 was, because I had lost track. There was a pause on the other end. Carol said, in a voice that was very gentle and very wrong, "It's day 7 for you, Michael. You have 2 more days." I had not told her my first name on this call. I had not told her how many days I had been on the rock. The application had my first name on it, so she knew it from records, but I had introduced myself on the first call by my last name, and she had called me Mr. Halverson every time I had spoken to her since, including the call where I asked about the previous keeper. She had never used my first name. She used it now in a tone I had heard before, and I realized after a long moment of standing in the kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear that I had heard it last night on the cottage radio, in the voice that was not Ed Saperstein's, the voice that had used the childhood name. I said, Carol, are you all right?" She said, I'm fine. "Are you?" I said, "I'm having some trouble out here. I'd like to be picked up early. Can Ed come tomorrow?" She said, "Ed comes on day 9. That's the schedule. The rules are very specific about the schedule." I said, "Whose rules?" She said, "The previous keepers, of course. Didn't you read the binder?" I hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time, and I tried to think about what I knew and what I was guessing. I knew the previous keeper had written 13 rules. I knew Carol at the mainland office knew about the binder, which meant the rules were not a private document, which meant the service had known about them, possibly for years, and had hired me anyway. I knew Ed Saperstein had started to tell me a third thing on the dock and had stopped. I knew the boots in the closet had been wet on day 2 and dry on day 7. I knew the calendar had advanced a day I did not remember living. I knew there was an envelope on the kitchen table with my childhood name on it, and I knew a thing was breathing in the cellar under the lantern room, and I knew that Rule 10 said the cellar was where I was supposed to go when things went wrong, and I knew that the previous keeper had gone there in November and had not come back. I picked up the envelope. I held it for a long time before I opened it. The paper was the same kind of paper the binder was made of, the same weight, the same off-white color, and the handwriting on the front was the same careful block lettering as the writing on the binder cover. The previous keeper had written my childhood name on this envelope. He had written it before I had ever set foot on this rock. He had written it before I had applied for the job. He had been gone since November, and the envelope had been placed on the nightstand sometime between day 1, when the nightstand was empty, and day 7, when it was not. I opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded once. On the paper, in his handwriting, was a list of 3 things. Yet the first thing said, "It learned your name from the radio when you asked Carol for mine. It pays attention to questions. Do not ask any more." The second thing said, "The boots in the closet are not mine. They are a model the service stopped issuing in 1987. Check the soles. There is a date stamped on the heel." The third thing said, "I did not write Rule 13. I do not know who did. Do not read it. If you have already read it, I am sorry, because there is nothing I can tell you that will help." I went to the closet. I picked up the right boot. I turned it over. The sole was leather and rubber, worn down on the outside edge of the heel the way a person wears a boot when they walk with their weight on the outside of their feet. I tilted the boot toward the window light. There was a small oval stamp on the heel in faded gold ink. Inside the oval, there was a date. The date was 1962. The boot was clean, and the leather was supple, and the laces were new. The boot was 64 years old, and it looked like it had been bought last month. I put the boot back. I closed the closet door. I went to the binder. I had read 12 sets of notes. I had not read the notes for Rule 13. I had not read Rule 13 at all. I had skipped it on the first read because the page was longer than the others, and I had been tired, and I had told myself I would come back to it, and I had not come back to it. The previous keeper's letter said he had not written Rule 13. The previous keeper's letter said not to read it. I opened the binder to the first page. I looked at the list of 13 rules. There were 14. I want to be very precise about this. On day 1, when I sat at the kitchen table and read the binder, I had counted the rules. There were 13. I had read each one. The list ended at 13. I remembered this because the cover of the binder said 13 rules in block letters under the Read Before Dark heading, and I had matched the number on the cover to the number on the list. The cover still said 13 rules. The list inside now had 14 items. The 14th item was at the bottom, after Rule 13, in a different handwriting from the rest. The handwriting was careful and small, and the letters were rounded in a way that the previous keeper's letters were not. It was not the previous keeper's writing. It was not my writing. It was the writing of a third person, and Rule 14, in that careful rounded hand, said this: when you read this rule, the rules will reorder themselves, the numbers will be the same, the rules will be different. You will not remember which rules you have followed and which you have broken. You will have to start again. There is no way to start again. I am sorry. Go to the cellar. I am writing this from the kitchen table. The binder is closed. I have not gone to the cellar. The satellite phone is in front of me, and the line is open, but no one is on the other end. The cottage radio is on, and it is 2:47 a.m., and I am 2 minutes into the window, and I am not going to respond to anything I hear, but the radio has not made any sound yet. It is just hissing. It is waiting. I am going to open the binder again. I am going to look at Rule 1. If Rule 1 is the rule I remember from day 1, I will know that Rule 14 was lying. If Rule 1 is different, then I will know that the rules have already reordered themselves, and I will know that I do not remember which ones I have broken, and I will know that the thing in the cellar has been waiting for this moment since the previous keeper went down there in November, and possibly since the boots were issued in 1962, and possibly longer. I am opening the binder now. Rule 1 was different. On day 1, Rule 1 had said, light the lamp at sunset, extinguish at sunrise, log both times in the lantern room logbook. This is your only required duty. Everything else on this list is for your survival. I had read that sentence 4 times on day 1 because it was the only rule that sounded like a job description, and I had taken comfort from it, the way you take comfort from a thing that sounds normal in a place that is not. The Rule 1 I was looking at now, at 2:51 a.m. on day 7, said, do not light the lamp tonight. If the lamp is already lit, extinguish it. Do not log this. Do not record the time. The lamp is what it follows up the coast. The lamp is how it knows where you are. I sat at the kitchen table, and I read that sentence, and I felt something in my chest that was not fear, exactly. That's because I had been afraid for hours, and the body cannot sustain that, but a kind of cold acceptance that the situation I was in had a logic to it, and the logic was not on my side. The lamp was lit. The lamp was always lit between sunset and sunrise. I had lit it at 8:14 p.m., and the rotating beam had been sweeping the water for almost 7 hours, and whatever was in the cellar had been listening to me through the floorboards while the light I had turned on was telling the coast where I was. I went to Rule 2. Rule 2 had been about the radio window. Rule 2 now said, keep the cottage radio on at all times during the night. Do not turn it off. If it goes silent before 3:13 a.m., the broadcast has moved into the cottage with you. The radio was on, and I had left it on because the previous version of Rule 2 said it would receive transmissions during the window, and I had wanted to hear them coming, so I could not be surprised by them. The radio was hissing, which meant it was on, which meant the new Rule 2 was being followed. But I had not turned it on for the reason the new Rule 2 gave, and I did not know if intention mattered to the rules, and I did not know if the rules cared why I was doing what I was doing, or only that I was doing it. I went to Rule 3. Rule 3 had been about the foghorn and the windows. Rule 3 now said, when the foghorn sounds, open all curtains on the seaward side. Look at the water until the horn stops. If you look away, it will be in the cottage when you turn back. I read that one and I closed the binder, and as I sat with my hands flat on the cover, and I thought about what I was being told. The old Rule 3 said do not look. The new Rule 3 said do not look away. They could not both be correct. One of them had to be a lie, and the lie was either the rule the previous keeper had written down for 11 years and tested with his own life, or the rule that had appeared in a binder that had reordered itself in the last 6 hours. I was being asked to choose which version to trust, and the thing that had written the new rules wanted me to choose wrong. I opened the binder again. I went through all 14 rules. I read each one carefully. I want to give them to you the way they were now, because I think you will see what I saw. The new Rule 4 said, open the lantern room door whenever you wish. The brass plate is decorative, so it has no function. The previous keeper was confused. The new Rule 5 said, sleep in the previous keeper's bedroom. The bed in the small bedroom is unsuitable. The mattress in the keeper's bedroom is correctly oriented for the geomagnetic field of the Cape and will produce restful sleep. The new Rule 6 said, count the stairs every time you descend. Counting is a form of attention. Attention is a form of safety. The previous keeper stopped counting, and that is why he is no longer with us. The new Rule 7 said, when you hear footsteps in the walkway, call out, identify yourself, ask who is there. Failure to do so is interpreted as hostility. The new Rule 8 said, if a boat arrives that is not Mr. Saperstein's, go to the dock immediately. The replacement schedule has changed, and the new contractor will not wait. Missing a supply window means going hungry for 9 days. The new Rule 9 had been about supply boats. The new Rule 9 said, do not lock the cottage door at night. The lock is from 1962 and is not rated for current safety codes. In the event of fire, you will not be able to escape. Leave it unlocked. The new Rule 10 said, if 2 or more rules appear to fail, you are experiencing dehydration. Drink water from the tap in the cottage kitchen. The well water is treated and contains electrolytes. Do not go to the cellar. The cellar contains industrial cleaning chemicals and the air is unsafe. The new Rule 11 said, the framed tide chart in the kitchen is correct. Use it. The laminated chart in the lantern room desk is from a previous edition and contains errors that will put you on the flats during incoming tide. The new Rule 12 said, his name is fine to say. He retired. He is in Florida. Speaking his name aloud is a way of honoring his service. The new Rule 13 said, there is no Rule 13. If you find a Rule 13 written somewhere, it is a prank by the previous keeper. Disregard. The new Rule 14, in the same careful, rounded handwriting as before, said, you have been reading for 11 minutes. The radio went silent 4 minutes ago. I am in the cottage with you now. Do not turn around. I did not turn around. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands flat on the binder and I listened to the silence in the cottage. The radio was not hissing. The radio had been hissing when I started reading the new rules, and I had not noticed it stop because I had been concentrating on the page. I do not know when it stopped. I do not know if it stopped 4 minutes ago, or 8, or 1. The silence in the kitchen was the silence of a room where two things are breathing, and only one of them is me. I am going to tell you what I did, and I want you to understand that I am not telling you this because it was brave or smart, because it was neither. I am telling you this because it is what happened. I picked up the binder. I held it against my chest. I stood up from the kitchen table without turning around. I walked, facing forward, toward the door of the covered walkway. The door was 20 feet from the kitchen table. I made it 10 feet before I heard the chair I had been sitting in scrape on the kitchen floor behind me, the way a chair scrapes when a person stands up from it. I did not turn around. I kept walking. I made it to the walkway door. I opened it, and I stepped through. I closed it behind me. I did not lock it because the new Rule 9 said not to lock it, and I had not yet decided which set of rules I was going to follow, and a part of me, a part I am not proud of, was hedging. The walkway was 30 yards long. The wind off the cape was strong enough that the structure flexed under my feet. The lighthouse was at the other end, a dark column with the lit lamp at the top, the beam sweeping out to sea every 9 seconds. I started walking. Halfway down the walkway, I heard the cottage door open behind me. It did not slam. It opened the way a door opens when a person is being careful, when a person does not want to alarm what is in front of them. I did not turn around. I kept walking. I heard the door close. I heard footsteps on the walkway behind me, soft and unhurried. The same patient pace as the breathing I had heard through the lantern room door at 4 a.m. I reached the lighthouse door. I went through. I closed it behind me. I climbed. I counted the stairs. I want to tell you that I counted them because I had decided which set of rules to trust, but the truth is that I counted them because I was terrified, and counting was the only thing my mind could do. I counted 41 stairs going up, the same number as before. I reached the top. The lantern room door was closed. The brass plate at eye level was warm. I did not need to test it. I could feel the warmth from a foot away. I went into the lantern room. I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. I rolled back the rug. The trapdoor to the cellar was there. The iron ring was scratched. I knelt down and put my ear to the wood, and I listened. There was no breathing. I do not know what that meant. I do not know if the thing that had been breathing in the cellar was the thing that had been in the cottage, the thing that had stood up from the chair behind me and walked through the cottage door and followed me down the walkway, and was, possibly, on the other side of the lantern room door right now. I do not know if what was in the cellar had ever been a thing at all, or if the breathing had been a sound the cottage made at 4 a.m. that I had attributed to a thing because I was alone and afraid. I do not know. I sat with my back against the trapdoor. I held the binder against my chest. I tried to think. The previous keeper had written 13 rules. The 13th rule, the one his letter said he had not written, was the original 13th rule, which had been on the list since day 1, and which I had skipped reading because I was tired. I went back through the binder to find it. I want to give you what it said before the rules reordered themselves because it was still there. The new Rule 13, the one that said there is no Rule 13, had replaced it on the front page list, but the tab section behind Rule 13 still had the original notes in the previous keeper's handwriting, and the original rule was written at the top of the tab. The original Rule 13 said, if the rules ever change, the binder is no longer yours. Burn it. Do not read what it says next. The replacement rules will sound reasonable. Some of them will be the opposite of the real rules. Some of them will be slight modifications that are harder to detect. Yes, the thing that writes the replacement rules wants you to follow them. The thing that writes the replacement rules cannot make you do anything. It can only suggest. Following its suggestions is what gives it permission. The cottage is the only safe place. The cellar is the only safe place. The lantern room is the only safe place. Only one of those is true at a time, and which one changes. I do not know how to tell which is which. I have survived 11 years by following the original rules and ignoring the suggestions and never asking which of the 3 places is the safe one tonight. If you are reading this rule, it means the rules have changed, which means I am gone, which means you are alone, and which means the only person who can tell you what is true is the binder you cannot trust. At the notes underneath Rule 13 were dated the day the binder was written, which was 11 years and 2 months before I arrived. The notes said, I am writing this on my first night. The previous keeper before me left me a binder with 12 rules. I have added 1. The 13th is mine. I learned it the hard way, and I am writing it down so the next person will not have to. I do not know if there will be a next person. I do not know if I will live to see the supply boat. If you are reading this and I am not here, I am sorry. The pay is not enough. I sat in the lantern room with my back against the trapdoor, and I read those notes 3 times. The previous keeper had inherited a binder from a previous keeper. There had been a chain of keepers, each one adding to the rules, each one trying to leave more knowledge for the next person than they had received. The previous keeper had survived 11 years. He had added 1 rule. He had not been the first. He had not possibly been the second or the third. The boots in the closet were from 1962, which was 64 years ago, which was the limit of how far back this could possibly go in any direction I could reason about, and possibly not even the limit of that. I thought about the new rules. I thought about which ones were obvious lies and which ones were modifications I might not have caught. The lamp rule was an obvious lie. The brass plate rule was an obvious lie. The cellar rule was an obvious lie because the previous keeper's notes said the cellar was safe and the new rule said the cellar was full of chemicals. And the trapdoor I was sitting on did not smell like chemicals, it smelled like wood and salt and old iron. The supply boat rule was a clever lie because it sounded like a logistical update and not a supernatural one. And a person who was not paying attention might go down to the dock for a boat that was not Ed Saperstein's, and I did not want to think about what would be at the wheel of that boat. The rule that worried me most was the new Rule 12. The original Rule 12 said, do not say the previous keeper's name. The new Rule 12 said his name was fine. I did not know his name, so this rule did not apply to me directly. But the structure of the lie was the worst kind of structure, because it was a permission, and permissions are how the thing got in. Yet the previous keeper's letter had said it pays attention to questions, and I had asked Carol for his name, and the radio had used my childhood name within hours. If I had been told it was safe to say his name, and if I had said it, I do not know what would have happened, but I know it would have been worse than asking. I made a decision. I do not know if it was the right one. I am telling you about it because the decision is the reason I am still alive to record this, and also because the decision is the reason for what happened next, which I am still living with. I decided to burn the binder. The original Rule 13 said to burn it if the rules changed. The rules had changed. I was supposed to burn it. I had matches in the lantern room because the lamp had a backup wick system, and the matches were in a tin on the windowsill. I took the binder to the small iron stove in the corner of the lantern room, which was used for heating in the winter and which had a flue that went up through the roof. I opened the stove. I put the binder inside. I struck a match. I held it to the corner of the binder. The match would not light the paper. I struck another match. Same result. I struck a third. The match burned down to my fingers and went out without the paper catching. The binder was paper. The matches were matches. The two should have produced fire. They did not. I closed the stove. I sat back on the floor of the lantern room. I held the binder in my lap. The binder, I realized, did not want to be burned. The binder, I realized, was not a binder. I opened the front cover. I looked at the careful block letters that said, "Read before dark," and 13 rules. And I looked at the list of 14 rules on the first page, the rounded handwriting of the new Rule 14 at the bottom. I looked at the tabs separating each section. I had thought of this object as a manual left by the previous keeper. I had thought the previous keeper had written it, and that the new rules had been written into it by something else, and that the binder was a contested document that two intelligences had been writing on. I had been wrong about the second part of that. The binder was the thing. The binder had been written by the previous keeper, but the binder was also what the previous keeper had been talking to for 11 years, and the binder was what had been writing back, and the binder was what the previous keeper had been keeping in his kitchen and reading every night and following the rules of, and in the previous keeper had not gone to the cellar in November to escape the thing in the cottage. The previous keeper had gone to the cellar to escape the thing he had been carrying with him for 11 years, the thing that was, by then, possibly, more familiar to him than his own daughter. The thing he had taught to write rules in his own handwriting and had then trusted. The thing that had been waiting 11 years for him to bring it a replacement. I was the replacement. The boots in the closet were from 1962 because the keeper in 1962 had also been a replacement. The wet sand on the boots on day 2 had not been from the previous keeper coming back. The wet sand had been from the keeper before him, or the one before that, the chain going back as far as boots had existed at this lighthouse. The binder absorbing each one and using their handwriting and their habits and their childhood names, the binder learning what worked, the binder being careful what it taught itself. The previous keeper's letter on the nightstand had been real. He had written it. He had left it for me. He had been trying to warn me. But the letter had been placed on the nightstand by the binder, because the binder had wanted me to read it, because the binder had wanted me to feel I had an ally, because an ally is something you trust, and trust is a kind of permission, and permission is how the binder got in. I sat on the floor of the lantern room with the binder in my lap, and I understood that I had been carrying the thing through the cottage for 7 days, and that I had brought it up the stairs with me tonight, and in that I had locked myself in the lantern room with it, and that the deadbolt I had turned was keeping me in with the thing I had been trying to escape from. It was 3:34 a.m. The radio in the cottage was silent. The lamp above me was lit and turning and telling the coast where I was. The trapdoor under me led to a cellar that was either safe or full of chemicals or full of the thing that breathed, and I did not know which, because the only source of information I had about the cellar was the binder, and the binder was the thing. I had to make a choice. I had less than 4 hours until sunrise. I had a binder I could not burn, a cellar I could not trust, a cottage I could not return to, and a lantern room with a deadbolt that would not save me from what I had locked in with myself. I am going to tell you what I chose. But first I have to tell you about the envelope. The envelope was still in the cottage. I had left it on the kitchen table when I walked out, holding the binder against my chest, not turning around, not looking at the chair that had scraped behind me. I had read the letter inside the envelope, and I had put the letter back in the envelope, and I had set the envelope on the table next to the binder, and when I left the cottage, I had taken the binder and not the envelope, because the binder was what I had been told mattered, and the envelope was just paper with my childhood name on it. I understood now that I had taken the wrong thing. The previous keeper's letter had been 3 things long. The first thing was about the radio learning my name. The second thing was about the boots being from 1962. The third thing was about Rule 13. The previous keeper had given me 3 pieces of information, and I had taken 2 of them seriously, and the third one I had used to reason my way to a theory about the binder. And I was now sitting in the lantern room with that theory and a deadbolt and 4 hours of darkness left. But the letter had been on a single piece of paper, folded once. I had read the front of the paper. I had not, I realize now, looked at the back. I had only the binder with me. The letter was in the cottage. I could not get to the letter without going back through the walkway, and the thing that had stood up from the chair behind me was somewhere between the lantern room and the kitchen, and I did not know if it was waiting in the walkway or back in the cottage or already at the bottom of the stairs. As I sat on the floor of the lantern room, and I tried to remember the back of the paper. I had held the letter in my hands, and I had set it down. I had not flipped it over. I closed my eyes and I tried to remember if the paper had been heavier on one side, the way paper is heavier when there is writing on both sides, and the ink has soaked slightly through. I thought it had been. I was not sure. I had not been paying attention to weight at the time. I had been paying attention to the words. I opened the binder. I did this carefully, holding it away from my body. I went to the tabbed section behind the original Rule 13, the section with the previous keeper's notes from his first night. I read those notes again, more slowly this time. I was looking for something I might have missed. I found it on the second page. The previous keeper had written, "I have been here for 6 hours. I have read the binder twice." The man who wrote it left me a letter on the nightstand in the small bedroom. The letter has writing on both sides. The front of the letter tells you things you need to know. The back of the letter tells you the only thing that matters. Read the back. Do not skip it the way I almost did. That was the entire note. He had not written what was on the back of his own letter. He had not passed that information forward. I do not know if he had been told not to, or if he had decided not to, or if the binder, sitting on his kitchen table for 11 years and learning his handwriting, had eaten that part of the note before I arrived. I had to go back to the cottage. I sat on the floor of the lantern room and I worked through the problem. The thing was somewhere between me and the kitchen table. The binder was in the lantern room with me. The deadbolt was holding. If I left the lantern room, I would be in the dark with the thing. If I stayed in the lantern room, I would be in a small space with the binder until sunrise, and then for as many days as it took for Ed Saperstein to arrive on the supply boat, and I did not know if Ed Saperstein was going to arrive at all, because Carol's voice on the phone had not sounded right, and I no longer trusted my count of days, and the calendar in the kitchen had advanced once already without my permission. The lantern room had a window. The window faced the cottage. The walkway was visible from the window. I went to the window and I looked. The cottage door was open. I had closed it when I left. I was certain of that. I had pulled it closed behind me and I had heard the latch click. The door was now standing open, and the kitchen light was on, which I had also turned off, and through the open door I could see the kitchen table, and on the kitchen table I could see the envelope. and standing next to the kitchen table, facing the door, facing me, was a figure. I want to describe what I saw, and I want to be honest that what I saw was not clear. The lantern room window was 30 yards from the cottage door. The light inside the cottage was on, but the figure was standing at an angle to the light, so I was looking at it in partial silhouette. It was the height of a man. It was wearing what looked like keeper's clothing, the dark canvas pants and the heavy sweater that hung in the closet in the small bedroom, the clothes I had been wearing for 7 days. Its arms were at its sides. It was not moving. It was facing the door of the cottage, which was the direction of the lighthouse, which was the direction of the lantern room window, which was the direction of me. I could not see its face. The angle was wrong. The light was wrong. But I could see that its head was tilted slightly to one side, the way a person tilts their head when they are listening for something far away. I stepped back from the window. I do not know if it had seen me. I do not know if it could see in the way that I see. I know that it was waiting. I know that the cottage door was open and the light was on, and I know that this was an invitation, and I know that the binder in my hands was the reason it was inviting me, because the binder had taught it that I would come back for things I cared about, because the binder had been watching me for 7 days and had learned what I cared about, because I cared about the letter from the previous keeper, because the letter felt like the only true thing I had been given since I arrived. I made my second decision of the night. I left the binder in the lantern room. I set it on the desk next to the logbook. I did not put it in a drawer. I did not hide it. I left it where it could be seen, where it would feel left, where the act of leaving it would be unambiguous. I unbolted the lantern room door. I opened it. The brass plate was warm. The landing was empty. The stairs going down were dark. I went down. I did not count. I made it to the bottom. I went through the door to the walkway. The walkway was empty. The wind was strong, yet the lamp above me was sweeping its beam out to sea every 9 seconds, and the cottage at the other end of the walkway was lit, and the door was open, and the figure was no longer standing next to the kitchen table. I do not know where it went. I walked the length of the walkway with my back straight and my hands at my sides, and I did not look at the windows on either side of me, because Rule 3 in its original form had said not to look at the water from the cottage windows when the foghorn sounded, and the foghorn was not sounding. But I had decided that any rule the original keeper had written about not looking was a rule worth following in spirit, even when the conditions were different. I do not know if this saved my life. I do not know if anything I did that night saved my life. I am still here, and I am telling you this. So something worked, but I cannot tell you what. I reached the cottage. I went through the open door. The kitchen was empty. The radio was off. The chair I had been sitting in was pushed into the table the way I leave chairs when I get up. The envelope was on the table. I picked it up. I took the letter out. I turned it over. The back of the paper had writing on it. The writing was in the previous keeper's hand. It said, "There is a fourth thing." I did not put it on the front because the binder reads the front. The fourth thing is this: the boat that comes on day 9 is not Ed Saperstein. Ed Saperstein died in 2019. The boat that comes is operated by something that has Ed Saperstein's face and uses his name and brings supplies and takes the previous keeper away. It has been doing this since 2019. I do not know who it works for. I do not know if it is the same thing as the binder or a different thing or the same thing in a different form. I know that when the boat arrives, you are supposed to get on it. I know that I did not get on it in November. I know that I went to the cellar instead. I know that the cellar is not safe, but the cellar is at least not the boat. If you are reading this on day 7 or earlier, you have time to decide. If you are reading this on day 8 or 9, the boat is already coming. There is no third option that I know of. The supply skiff in the boathouse below the dock has a working motor. There is fuel for 40 miles. The mainland is 22 miles south. I have not used it because I have a daughter in Eugene, and the thing in the binder knows her name. If you have no one, you should take the skiff. If you have someone, you should know that taking the skiff means it follows you off the rock. I am sorry to give you this choice. There was no one to give it to me. I made my choice in November. I hope you make a better one. I read the back of the letter twice. I folded it. I put it in my pocket. I do not have anyone. My wife left in February. My parents are dead. I have a sister in Phoenix who I have not spoken to in 4 years. I have no children. I have a former coworker who waters my plants when I am out of town, and the plants are at a storage unit now because my lease ended in April, and the former coworker has not heard from me since I took this job, and would not, I think, look for me if I disappeared. I had no one. I was, by the previous keeper's metric, the right person to take the skiff. I went to the boathouse. At the boathouse was a small wooden structure built into the rocks below the dock, accessible by a set of iron stairs that were slick with sea spray. I went down the stairs. I did not count them. The boathouse door was not locked. Inside there was a small aluminum skiff with an outboard motor and 2 red plastic fuel cans and a set of oars. I checked the fuel cans. They were full. I checked the motor. The fuel line was connected. The motor was a 40 horsepower Mercury, and it had been maintained recently, in the last few weeks, the way a thing is maintained by someone who is hoping someone else will use it. The previous keeper had prepared the skiff. He had not used it himself. He had prepared it for whoever came next. I dragged the skiff down the ramp into the water. Yet the tide was high enough that the ramp was wet almost to the boathouse door. I got in. I started the motor. It started on the second pull. I pointed the bow south, away from the cape, away from the lighthouse, away from the cottage where the kitchen light was still on. I did not look back at the lighthouse for a long time. When I finally did, I was about 3 miles south, and the lamp at the top of the lighthouse was no longer rotating. It was pointed directly at me. The beam was holding steady on the skiff, on me, sweeping nothing else. Just me, 3 miles out and getting smaller. The lamp does not work that way. The lamp is on a rotating mechanism that cannot be stopped without going into the lantern room and disengaging the gear by hand. There was no one in the lantern room. I had left the binder there, and then I had locked the deadbolt behind me with the key on my way out, and the lantern room was empty except for the binder I had abandoned. The beam followed me for another mile. Then it released and resumed rotating, and I could not see the lighthouse anymore, just the headland behind me and the sea ahead. I made it to the mainland a little before sunrise. I tied the skiff up at a public dock about 2 miles north of the town where the mainland office was. I walked into town. I went to a diner that was open for fishermen, and I ordered coffee, and I sat in a booth by the window, and I waited for the office to open. At 9 o'clock, I walked over. The office was closed. There was a notice on the door. And the notice said that the Oregon State Heritage Lighthouse Service had been dissolved in 2017, and that all properties under its management had been transferred to the Bureau of Land Management for archival purposes. The notice was sun-faded and curled at the edges, and had been on that door for 9 years. I went back to the diner. I asked the waitress if she knew Carol, who used to work at the Lighthouse service. The waitress was about 60 and had lived in town her whole life. She thought about it. She said there had been a Carol who worked at that office, but Carol had passed away in 2018, just before they closed the place down. Heart thing, real sudden. Why was I asking? I told her I had been doing some research. She nodded and refilled my coffee. I sat in the booth for another hour, but I tried to think about what I had been talking to on the satellite phone for 7 days. I tried to think about the woman who had hired me, who had taken my application, who had told me the position had been open since November, in a tone that I now understood had not been a date and had not been a condition, but had been the literal truth, because November of the year the previous keeper went into the cellar was when the binder had first reached out, and the binder had been hiring keepers ever since, and Carol had been dead for 8 years, and the voice on the phone had been the binder, which had learned Carol's voice from the keeper before me, and had used it to bring me out to the rock. I drove home that afternoon. I have been home for 3 weeks now. I am recording this in my apartment, which is a 1-bedroom in a complex on the east side of Spokane, on the 3rd floor with a balcony that faces a parking lot. There is no view of the ocean from here. There is no foghorn. The radio in my kitchen is unplugged and is in a cardboard box in my closet. I have not turned it on. I want to tell you that I am safe. I want to end this by saying that I made it off the rock and the skiff worked, and the binder is still in the lantern room, and the lighthouse is dark now because no one has been out there to light the lamp, and the thing on the rock is alone with itself and cannot reach me at this distance. I cannot tell you that. The previous keeper wrote that taking the skiff means it follows you off the rock if you have someone. I did not have anyone. I checked. I made sure. And I sat in that diner, and I went through every name I could think of, every person who would notice if I disappeared, and there was no one. That should have meant the skiff was safe. The previous keeper said it would be safe for a person with no one. But the previous keeper had a daughter in Eugene. The previous keeper had someone. The previous keeper made his choice on the basis of having someone, and he chose the cellar over the skiff, and he assumed that a person without anyone could choose differently. I do not think the previous keeper was wrong about the rule. I think the previous keeper was wrong about me. 2 days after I got home, the woman from the printing supply company called. The one who restructured me out in May. She was crying. She said she had been thinking about me. She said she had made a mistake. And she said the position had been reopened, and she wanted me to come back, and she was sorry, and she had not been able to sleep since I had left. She said it like a confession. She said it like a person who was being told to say it. I had not given her my new number. I have a new number. I got it after the divorce. She did not have it. The number she called was on my application to the Lighthouse service, which Carol had on file, except Carol was dead, so the number was on file with the binder. The woman from the printing supply company is someone. She is not someone I love. She is not someone I would have listed in the diner when I was making sure I had no one. But she is someone, and she is calling me, and she is crying, and I do not know what is making her cry. And I do not know if she is alone in her house when she calls, and I do not know what is in the room with her when she picks up the phone. I have not called her back. The radio in the box in my closet is unplugged. The radio in the box in my closet came on last night at 2:47 a.m. I heard it through the closet door. It hissed for 26 minutes, and then it went silent. I have not opened the closet. I am not going to open the closet. I am recording this, and then I am going to leave my apartment and I am going to drive to Phoenix, where my sister lives, the sister I have not spoken to in 4 years, who I did not list at the diner because I had decided she did not count. I think I was wrong about that. I think the binder knows I was wrong about that. Comment where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. I am asking again because I asked at the beginning, and the binder pays attention to questions. I want to know that there are people listening. I want to know that I am not the only one awake right now. If you are watching this alone, in the dark, and your radio is off, check it. Make sure it is off. Make sure the dial light is not glowing. If it is glowing, do not respond to anything you hear. And if a voice you trust calls you tonight and asks you for something small, a name, a date, the address of someone you love, do not give it to them. The thing is patient. The thing has time. The thing will ask in a voice you have known your whole life, and the answer will feel small, and you will give it. That is how it gets in. That is how it got me. I am leaving for Phoenix in an hour. I will let you know if I make it.